The man who built the largest building on the planet never got to walk through it on the day it opened. He was not sick. He was not away on a trip. He was sitting in a police cell, arrested just weeks before the doors swung open on the thing he had spent 10 years of his life creating. One of the richest men in China, and on the biggest day of his career, nobody in the crowd was allowed to say his name out loud. To understand how a project this enormous ended with its own creator in handcuffs, you first have to understand what he actually built. Because it is not just big. It is the kind of big that your brain quietly refuses to accept. And hidden inside it is a beach with real sand and real waves in a city more than 1,000 kilometers from the nearest ocean, where the sun overhead is fake and the summer never ends. If a story like this is your thing, do me a quick favor and hit that like button and subscribe so the next one finds you. It genuinely helps the channel. Now let us get into it, because the building, the beach, and the man behind bars are all stranger than you are expecting. Start with the scale, because everything else grows out of it. This place is called the New Century Global Center, and it sits in the southern edge of Chengdu, the capital of Sichuan province in southwestern China. It runs 500 meters from one end to the other, 400 meters across, and 100 meters into the sky over 18 floors. Add every one of those floors together and you get roughly 1.7 million square meters of interior space. That figure is almost meaningless until you start comparing it to things you know. You could take the Pentagon, the largest office building in the United States, and set it down inside more than 3 times over. You could park 20 Sydney opera houses under the same roof. One British paper worked out that 16 Wembley stadiums would fit beneath it. Its footprint alone covers something like 4 times the area of Vatican City, the smallest country on Earth. This is not a complex of buildings. This is one continuous structure, and when it opened, it was crowned the largest building in the world by floor area, edging out Dubai's airport for the record. And the wildest part is not even the shell. It is what they poured inside it. There is a full shopping mall running through the lower levels, nearly 400,000 square meters of retail alone. There is a 5-star InterContinental hotel woven into the complex, holding more than 1,000 rooms, many of them with balconies that look down into the heart of the building. There is an IMAX cinema with more than a dozen screens. There is an Olympic-sized ice rink. There is a Mediterranean-style village with painted facades and arched windows, a university campus, conference halls, restaurants, offices built directly into the outer walls. The developer described it as several cities stacked under one roof, and that was not marketing. That was just an honest inventory. But the centerpiece, the thing sitting in the literal middle of everything, is the ocean. They call it Paradise Island Water Park, and it fills the core of the building with an artificial beach of about 5,000 square meters of real sand, sloping down into a wave pool the size of a small lake. Machines push fresh surf up onto that sand every few minutes on a fixed schedule. A lazy river winds a long loop past artificial palms and fake rock formations. Water slides spiral down from the levels above. A full-size wooden pirate ship sits permanently anchored at one end for kids to climb on. And then there is the sun, not a metaphor, not a lighting effect. A system of powerful lamps paired with heating elements that warms the air across the entire atrium and raises the temperature of the sand under your feet, while a single LED screen, 150 meters wide and 40 meters tall, wraps the horizon and plays an endless loop of sunrises and slow tropical sunsets. This matters more than it sounds, because Chengdu is not a sunny city. Its skies are gray for much of the year and real sunlight is scarce. But step inside the global center and it is a warm summer afternoon in there. Rain or shine, freezing or not, every single day. A guest can stand on a hotel balcony 15 floors up and watch waves break below their feet. It is Las Vegas if somebody kept turning the dial past where it was ever meant to stop. So who decides to build an indoor ocean in a landlocked city? For that, you have to understand a place that felt like it had something to prove. In the early 2000s, Chengdu was already a giant, home to well over 10 million people, with a strong technology base and food people cross the country to eat. But beyond China's borders, almost nobody had heard of it. Shanghai had the glittering skyline. Beijing had the coming Olympics. Shenzhen was assembling half the world's electronics. Chengdu had pandas, hot pot, and a reputation that stopped at the edge of the province. Then, at the tail end of the 1990s, Beijing set an enormous machine in motion. It was called the Western Development Strategy, a national campaign to pour investment into the country's inland regions and haul them up toward the wealth of the coast. For Chengdu, that meant money, political backing, and permission to grow at a pace it had never seen. And the local leadership had a very specific idea about where that growth should go. Not up in the crowded old center, but south, out past the ring roads into open farmland along a brand new boulevard called Tianfu Avenue that would become the spine of an entire new district. The man driving all of this was a politician named Li Chuncheng. He rose fast. He became mayor of Chengdu in 2001, took over as the city's Communist Party chief a couple of years later, and eventually climbed to deputy party secretary of the whole province. Li wanted his new southern district to look and feel like a first-tier metropolis inside a decade, and he cleared the way for it with a ferocity that earned him a nickname. People called him Demolish Li. And here is the tell of the entire era. That name was not an insult. It was said with something close to admiration. A politician moving that fast needs a builder who can actually deliver at impossible scale, and Li found his in a man named Deng Hong. Deng had an unusual path for a property tycoon. Born in 1963, he was pulled into the military as a teenager in the 70s, and after leaving the army, he threw himself into business, zeroing in on Chengdu's booming property and hospitality scene by the mid-90s. Through his firm, the Entertainment and Travel Group, he spent that decade putting up hotels and convention venues until he dominated the city's events business. In 2003, Deng's company acquired a large stretch of land in that new southern district, and it did so at a price far below what the open market would ever have demanded. On that plot, he built the Century City Convention Center, which opened in 2008 and immediately became the venue everyone in Western China wanted for their trade fairs. It worked exactly as intended. Business travelers flooded in, hotels filled. The empty new district finally had a pulse. For Li, it was proof the southern gamble could pay off. For Deng, it was proof he could build at a size no rival could match. And that success is what unlocked the far bigger idea. He already owned the land next door. The crowds were already there. The whole city was hungry to look like Shanghai. So he pitched one single structure that would hold offices, shops, a hotel, and an entire entertainment world inside it, bigger than anything on the coast. They broke ground in February of 2010. What happened next is genuinely hard to believe for a building this size. The main structure topped out by late 2012, barely 2.5 years later. To move that fast, the engineers assembled the enormous main girders down on the ground and lifted them into place. And to open up the vast central hall without a forest of columns blocking the ocean, they built the roof on a web of tubular steel space trusses. The design came from Shenzhen Zhongshan architects, who wrapped the whole exterior in an ocean theme. The roofline rolls in long curves meant to suggest breaking waves. The upper edges flare outward like the wings of seagulls in flight, and a colossal glass dome crowns the central atrium, letting daylight pour down when the sky cooperates and serving as the ceiling of the indoor sea when it does not. Keeping all of it alive at once is a quiet engineering feat most visitors never notice. The fake sun dumps heat into a volume of air measured in the millions of cubic meters now, while the wave pool and the lazy river and thousands of damp human bodies flood that same air with humidity. One dedicated mechanical system holds the central hall at a constant, comfortable warmth, while the offices and hotel rooms around the edges run on entirely separate systems. The pools filter around the clock, and the whole atrium floor is sealed with waterproof membranes because a single leak up top would drain straight down into the parking levels below. And the ground itself was a real concern. In May of 2008, the Wenchuan earthquake struck with its epicenter only about 80 kilometers from Chengdu, leaving nearly 90,000 people dead or missing, just 2 years before crews broke ground here. So the structure was engineered hard against updated seismic codes, with the outer office blocks doubling as the bracing that holds the enormous central atrium steady. The doors formally opened on the 1st of July, 2013. The mall opened, the cinema started screenings, the water park welcomed its first paying swimmers, and the hotel took its first reservations. By that autumn, the place was running near full capacity, and that brings us back to the empty space in the crowd, because standing at the ribbon cutting, the one person conspicuously missing was the man who had conceived the entire thing. To understand where Deng Hong had gone, you have to look at the biggest political story in China at that exact moment. Xi Jinping had just taken power at the end of 2012, and within weeks, he launched an anti-corruption campaign that would eventually bring down some of the most powerful figures in the country. At the very top of that food chain sat a man named Zhou Yongkang, once China's internal security chief and one of the most feared people in the government, who would later be sentenced to life in prison. And one of the first major officials to fall in that entire campaign, an ally of Zhou, was Li Chuncheng, the same Li Chuncheng who had championed Chengdu's southern expansion. He was placed under investigation in December of 2012, and the probe locked hard onto the land deals and development approvals from his years running the city's growth. Deng Hong sat right in the middle of that web. In late February of 2013, police detained him at Chengdu Airport. His own company was left blindsided, with a spokesman admitting they did not even know where their chairman was. In the weeks that followed, dozens of local officials were pulled into a tangle of overlapping investigations, and the accusations against Deng were serious. Illegal land transfers, tax evasion, loan fraud. The land beneath the world's largest building, it was alleged, had been handed to him for a fraction of its worth through Li's connections, with farmers pushed off the plot for far less compensation than the law required. Through all of it, the building simply carried on. Deng's staff were told only that the chairman was unavailable. The wave pool kept churning. The fake sun switched on right on schedule every morning. The shops opened. The grand opening still went ahead, just quieter than planned, with shorter speeches and a trimmed guest list. Officials who had once eagerly posed shoulder to shoulder with Deng at earlier ribbon cuttings now kept a careful distance, and his name appeared nowhere in the official program. The consequences arrived in the years that followed. Li Chuncheng was convicted of taking bribes worth nearly 40 million yuan, around $6.3 million, along with abuse of power, and in October of 2015, he was sentenced to 13 years in prison. He told the court he accepted the verdict and would not appeal. Deng's own case moved through the system far more quietly, with far fewer details ever released, but he vanished from the story of the building he had spent a decade bringing to life. And there is one more thing that quietly disappeared, a detail almost nobody noticed at the time. The land deal for the global center had never stood alone. Right next door, on the adjacent plot, there was supposed to rise a grand cultural center designed by the world-famous architect Zaha Hadid, a contemporary arts museum under one of her signature sculpted roofs. That arts center was, in effect, the public justification for the whole arrangement. Handing a private developer that much prime land at a discount is hard to defend unless the city gets something real in return, and the museum was that something. The Global Center opened on schedule. The Hadid Arts Center did not. As the scandal swallowed the men behind it, work stalled, and its bare shell just sat there behind corrugated walls, visible from the finished megamall's upper floors. The spectacle got built. The civic promise it was traded for quietly faded into a footnote. So what happened to a record-breaking building after the men who made it possible were gone? The remarkable answer is that it never stopped, not for a single day. Shutting it down was never seriously on the table. A darkened world record landmark sitting empty in the heart of the flagship district would have crushed property values across the whole area and announced to the entire country that the Southern gamble had failed. So the shops kept trading, the hotel kept taking guests, and the waves kept rolling, all under interim management while state banks held the loans and the city watched closely. The early years were genuinely rocky. The surrounding district was still filling in, and Chengdu's established shopping crowds still drifted out of pure habit toward the older commercial core across town. Some upper retail floors stayed quiet. A few tenants came and went inside their first leases, but the district kept maturing around it. Technology firms and regional headquarters filled the office towers marching down Tianfu Avenue. The metro pushed further and further south, and the population living and working nearby climbed year after year until the weekends found a steady rhythm and the offices filled out. The ownership, though, went on a wild ride. The assets eventually landed under state-linked control, And then, in late 2019, one of China's most aggressive private property giants, Sunac China, agreed to take a majority stake, folding the global center and the neighboring convention complex into a portfolio deal worth around 15.3 billion yuan. The timing could not have been worse because Sunac bought in at the very peak of the property sector's debt bubble. Within 2 years, that bubble burst. When the giant developer Evergrande defaulted in late 2021, credit froze across the entire Chinese real estate industry, and Sunac found itself crushed under pressure from its own lenders, restructuring and refinancing pieces of its empire to survive. In roughly 6 years, the world's largest building had passed from a private tycoon to state-linked hands to a debt-laden property giant fighting for its life. Each transfer valued it differently. Each new owner swallowed a slice of its accumulated debt, and the financial machinery running underneath the building grew almost as tangled as the building itself. And yet, here is where it stands today. The New Century Global Center is still open, still trading. It is still routinely described as the world's largest building by floor area, though, by some current rankings, a couple of newer megastructures have crept ahead of it in the years since. Either way, it remains one of the largest single buildings ever constructed by human hands. The mall still runs its retail levels, the hotel still takes guests, the offices still house their tenants, the water park still opens on schedule, and that artificial sun still holds the beach at its permanent, unchanging summer afternoon, exactly as it did on the very first day. Deng Hong's name is no longer attached to the project he poured a decade of his life into. Li Chuncheng served his sentence. Zhou Yongkang, the powerful patron who sat above them both, went to prison for life. And Tianfu Avenue, the boulevard they built all of this around, became the financial spine of a city now home to more than 20 million people, lined with towers and metro lines and tech campuses running for kilometers past that giant glass dome. In the end, Chengdu got exactly what it set out to build: a city under a single roof, a coastline that does not exist, a sun that is not real, a place more than 1,000 kilometers from the nearest sea that runs its own private beach every single day of the year. The building outlasted the man who dreamed it, the politician who backed it, and the crooked deal that made it all possible. And it is still standing there, still glowing, still pulling in the crowds. If you made it all the way to the end, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. And drop me a comment because I am genuinely curious. If you had one full day inside the New Century Global Center, where would you head first? Straight for the fake beach, out onto the ice rink, or somewhere else entirely? Let me know down below, and if you want another story exactly like this, go check out the video showing up on your screen right now.